Hello, today I'll be reading Percy Jackson the Lightning Thief, Chapter 1, titled Accidentally Vaporize My Pre-Algebra Teacher. Okay. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom or dad told you about your birth, and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid reading this because you think it's fiction, great, read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. And once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too. And they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. My name's Percy Jackson, 12 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you could say that. I could start at any point in my short, miserable life to prove it. But things really started going bad last May when our 6th grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids and 2 teachers on a yellow school bus heading to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know it sounds like torture. Most students' ENC field trips were, but Mr. Brunner, her Latin teacher, was leading this trip, so I had hopes. Mr. Brunner was his middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He had thinny hair and a scruffy beard and a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told stories and joked and let us play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons, so he was the only teacher whose class didn't put me to sleep. I hope the field trip would be okay at least. I hope that for once I wouldn't get in trouble. Boy, was I wrong. See, bad things happen to me on field trips. Like at my 5th grade school. We went to the Sarkota battlefield. I had this accident with the Revolutionary War cannon. I wasn't aiming for the school bus, but of course I got expelled anyway. And before that, at my 4th grade school, we took a behind-the-scenes tour at the Marine World Shark Pool. I sort of hit the wrong lever on the catwalk, and our class took an unplanned swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea. This trip, I was determined to be good. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Beaufet, the freckly redhead kleptomaniac girl, hitting my friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny, he cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades, because he was the only 6th grader with acne and the start of a wispy beard on his chin. On top of all that, he was crippled. He had a note excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some kind of muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny, like every step hurt him, but don't let that fool you. You should have seen him run when it was enchilada day in the cafeteria. Anyway, Nancy Beaufet was throwing wads of sandwich that stuck in his curly brown hair, and she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. The headmaster had threatened me with death by in school suspension if anything bad, embarrassing, or even mildly entertaining happened on this trip. I'm gonna kill her, I mumbled. Grover calmed me down. It's okay. I like peanut butter. He dodged another piece of Nancy's sandwich. That's it. I tried to get up. Grover pulled me back to my seat. You're already on probation, he reminded me. You know you're getting blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wish I decked Nancy Beaufort right then and there. School suspension would have been nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into. Mr. Brunner led the museum tour. He rode up front in his wheelchair, guiding us through the big elderly galleries, past marble statues and glass cases full of really old black and orange pottery. It blew my mind when that stuff had survived for the 300 years. Gathered us around a 13-foot tall stone column with a big phoenix on the top, and started telling us how it was a grave marker, a steal, for a girl about our age. He told us about the carvings on the sides. I was trying to listen to what he had to say because it was kind of interesting, but everybody around me was talking, and every time I told them to shut up, the other teacher chaperone, Mrs. Dotts, would give me the evil eye. Miss Dotts was this little math teacher from Georgia who always wore a black leather jacket. Even though she was 50 years old, she looked mean enough to write a Harley right into your locker. She had come to Nancy halfway through the year when our last math teacher had a nervous breakdown. From her first day, Miss Dotts loved Nancy Beaufort, and I figured I was devil spawn. She would point her crooked finger at me and say, "Nance, now honey," real sweet, and I knew I was going to get after-school detention for a month. One time, after she'd made me erase answers out of old math books until midnight, I told Grover I didn't think Miss Dotts was human. He looked at me real serious and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Brunner kept talking about Greek funeral art. Finally, Nancy Beaufort snickered something about the naked guy on the still and turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" It came out louder than I meant it to. The whole group laughed. Mr. Brunner stopped his story. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "did you have a comment?" My face was totally red. I said, "No, sir." Mr. Brunner pointed to one of the pictures on the still. "Perhaps you'll tell us what this picture represents." I looked at the carving and felt a flush because I actually recognized it. "It's Kronos eating his kids, right?" "Yes," Mr. Brunner said, absolutely not satisfied. "And he did this because, well," I racked my brain to remember. "Kronos was the king god and..." "God?" Mr. Brunner asked. "Titan," I corrected myself, "and he didn't trust his kids, who were the gods. So Kronos ate them, right?" But his wife hid baby Zeus and gave Kronos a rock to eat instead. And later, when Zeus grew up, he tricked his dad, Kronos, into barfing up his brothers and sisters. "Ew," said one of the girls behind me. And so there was this big fight between the gods and the Titans, I continued, and the gods won. Some snickers from the group behind me, Nancy Beaufort, mumbled to a friend, like, "We're going to use this in real life. Like it's going to say on our job application, please explain why Kronos ate his kids and why Mr. Jackson," Brunner said to purify me. This is an excellent question. "This doesn't matter in real life." "Busted," Grover muttered. "Shut up," Nancy hissed, her face even brighter red than her hair. At least Nancy got pecked too. Mr. Brunner was the only one who ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had radar eyes. I thought about his question and shrugged. I don't know, sir. I see. Mr. Brunner looked disappointed. Well, have credit, Mr. Jackson. Zeus did indeed feed Kronos a mixture of mustard, wine, which made him dislodge his other 5 children, who, of course, being immortal gods, had been living and growing up completely unadjusted in the Titan's stomach. The gods defeated their father, sliced him to pieces with his own sickle, and scattered his remains in Tartarus, the darkest part of the underworld. On that happy note, it's time for lunch. Miss Dots, would you lead us back outside? The class drifted off. The girls holding their stomachs, the guys pushing each other around and acting like doofuses. Grove and I were about to follow when Mr. Brunner said, Mr. Jackson. I knew that was coming. I told Grover to keep going. Then I turned toward Mr. Brunner. Sir? Mr. Brunner had this look that wouldn't let you go. Intense brown eyes that could have been 1,000 years old and had seen everything. You must learn the answer to my question, Mr. Brunner told me, about the Titans, about real life, and how your studies apply to it. Oh, what you learn from me, he said, is vitally important. I expect you to treat it as such. I will accept only the best from you, Percy Jackson. I wanted to get angry. This guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure. It was kind of cool on tournament days when he dressed up in a suit of Roman armor and shouted, What ho! And challenged us, sword point against chalk, to run to the board and name every Greek and Roman person who had ever lived, and their mother, what god they worship. But Mr. Brunner expected me to be as good as everybody else, despite the fact that I have dyslexia and attention deficit disorder, and I'd never made above a C- in my life. No, he didn't expect me to be as good. He expected me better. I just couldn't learn all those names, facts, much less spell them correctly. I mumbled something about trying harder. Well, Mr. Brunner took one look, like he'd been at this girl's funeral. He told me to go outside and eat my lunch. The class gathered on the front steps of the museum. We could watch the foot track doing 5th Avenue. Overhead, a huge storm was brewing, with clouds blacker than I'd ever seen over the city. I figured maybe it was global warming or something, because the weather all across New York had been weird since Christmas. We had massive snowstorms, flooding wildflowers from lightning strikes. I wouldn't have been surprised if this was a hurricane blowing in. Nobody else seemed to notice. Some of the guys were letting pigeons with Lunchables crackers. Nancy Boone was trying to pickpocket something from a lady's purse. Of course, Miss Dots wasn't seeing a thing. Grover and I sat on the edge of the fountain, away from the others. We thought that maybe if we did that, everybody else wouldn't know we were from that school. A school for loser freaks who couldn't make it elsewhere. Detention? Grover asked. Nah, I said, not from Brunner. I just wish he'd lay off on me sometimes. I mean, I'm not a genius. Grover didn't say anything for a while. Then, when I thought he was going to give me some deep psychological comment to make me feel better, he said, Can I have your apple? I didn't have much of an appetite, so I let him take it. I watched the stream of cabs going down 5th Avenue. I thought about my mom's apartment, only a little ways uptown from where we sat. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. I wanted so bad to jump in a taxi and head home. She'd hug me and be glad to see me, but she'd be disappointed too. She'd send me right back to Yancy. Remind me that I had to try harder. Even if this was my 6th school in 6 years and I was probably going to be kicked out again, I would be able to... that sad look she'd give me. Mr. Brunner parked his wheelchair at the base of the handicapped ramp. He ate celery while he read a paperback novel. A red umbrella stuck up from the back of his chair, making it look like a motorized cafe table. I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Yancy Boba Fett appeared in front of me with her ugly friends. I guess she'd gotten tired of stealing from the porous and dumped her half-eaten sandwich in Grover's lap. Oops, she grinned at me with her crooked teeth. Her freckles were orange, as if somebody had spray painted her face with liquid Cheetos. I tried to stay cool. The school counselor had told me a million times, count to 10. Get control of your temper. But I was so mad my mind went blank. A wave rolled in my ears. I didn't remember touching her, but the next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting on her butt in the fountain screaming, "Percy pushed me!" Mrs. Dodds materialized next to us. Some of the kids were whispering, "Did you see the water?" I grabbed her. I didn't know what they were talking about. All I knew was that I was in trouble again. As soon as Mrs. Dodds was sure poor little Nancy was okay, trying to get her a new shirt at the museum gift shop. Extra. Miss Dodds turned on me. There was a triumphant fire in her eyes, as if I'd done something she'd been waiting for all semester. "No, honey." "I know," I grumbled. "Mom erased in workbooks. That wasn't the right thing to say." "Come with me," Miss Dodds said. "Wait," Grover yelped. "It was me. I pushed her." I stared at him, stunned. I couldn't believe he was trying to cover for me. Miss Dodds scared Grover to death. She glared at him so hard his whiskery chin trembled. "I don't think so, Mr. Underwood," she said, "but you will stay here?" Grover looked at me desperately. "It's okay, man," I told him. "Thanks for trying." "Honey," Miss Dodds barked at me. "Now." Nancy Beaufort smirked. I gave her my deluxe "I'll kill you later" stare. Then I turned to face Mrs. Dodds. But she wasn't there. She was standing at the museum entrance, away at the top of the stairs, gesturing patiently at me to come. How did she get there so fast? I'm almost like that a lot. When my brain falls asleep or something, the next thing I know, I've missed something, as if a puzzle piece fell out of the universe and left me staring at the blank place behind it. The school council told me this was part of the ADHD, my brain misinterpreting things. I wasn't so sure. I went after Mrs. Dodds. Halfway up the steps, I glanced back at Grover. He was looking pale, hiding his eyes between me and Mr. Brunner, like when Mr. Brunner didn't notice what was going on. Mr. Brunner was absorbing his novel. I looked back up. Miss Dodds had disappeared again. She was now inside the building at the end of the entrance hall. Okay, I thought she was going to make me buy a new shirt for Nancy at the gift shop, but apparently that wasn't the plan. I followed her deep into the museum. When I finally caught up to her, we were back in the Greek and Roman section. Except for us, the gallery was empty. Miss Dodds stood with her arms crossed in front of a big marble frieze of the Greek gods. She was making this weird noise in her throat, like growling. Even without the noise, I would have been nervous. It's weird being alone with a teacher, especially Mrs. Dodds. Something about the way she looked at the friends, as if she wanted to verbalize it. "You've been giving us problems, honey," she said. I did the safe thing. I said, "Yes, ma'am." She tugged on the cuff of her leather jacket. "Did you really think you'd get away with it?" The look in her eyes was beyond mad. It was evil. "She's a teacher." I thought nervously. "It's not like she's gonna hurt me." I said, "Order her, ma'am." Thunder shook the building. "We are not fools, Percy Jackson," Miss Stott said. "It was only a matter of time before we found you out. Confess and you will suffer less pain." I didn't know what she was talking about. All I could think of was that the teacher must have found the illegal stash of candy gift and sling out of my dorm room. Or maybe they realized I got my essay on Tom Sawyer from the internet without ever reading the book. And now they were going to take away my grade, or worse, they were going to make me read the book. "Well," she demanded. "Ma'am, your time is up," she hissed. Then the weirdest thing happened. Her eyes began to glow like barbecue coals. Her fingers stretched, turning into talons. Her jacket melted into large leathery wings. She wasn't human. She was a shriveled hag with bat wings and claws and a mouthful of yellow fangs. And she was about to slice me to ribbons. Then things got even stranger. Mr. Brunner who had been out in front of the museum a minute before, wheeled his chair into the doorway of the gallery, holding a pen in his hand. "What ho, Percy!" he shouted, and tossed the pen through the air. Mrs. Dodds lunged at me with a yelp. I dodged and felt talons slash the air next to my ear. I snatched the ballpoint pen out of the air, but when it hit my hand, it wasn't a pen anymore, it was a sword. Mr. Brunner's bronze sword, which he always used on tournament day. Mrs. Dodds spun toward me with the murderous look in her eyes. My knees were jelly. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the pen. She sneered, "Die, honey," and she flew straight at me. Absolute terror ran through my body. I did the only thing that came naturally. I swung the sword. The metal blade hit her shoulder and passed clean through her body as if she was made of water. Miss Dodds was a sandcastle in a power fan. She exploded yellow powder, vaporized on the spot, leaving nothing but the smell of sulfur, a dying screech, and a chill of evil in the air, as if those two glowing red eyes were still watching me. I was alone. There was a ballpoint pen in my hand. Mr. Brunner wasn't there. Nobody was there but me. My hands were still trembling. My lunch must have been crammed with magic mushrooms or something. Had I imagined the whole thing? I went back outside. It had started to rain. Grover was sitting by the fountain, a museum map tented over his head. Nancy Beaufort was still standing there, soaked from her swim in the fountain, grumbling to her ugly friends. When she saw me, she said, "I hope Miss Keir whipped your butt." I said, "Who? Our teacher, duh." I blinked. We had no teacher named Mrs. Dodds, named Mrs. Clear. I asked Nancy, what was she talking about? She just rolled her eyes and turned away. I asked Grover where Mrs. Dodds was. He said, "Who?" But he paused first, and he wouldn't look at me, so I thought he was messing with me. "Not funny, man," I told him. "This is serious." Thunder boomed overhead. I saw Mr. Brunner sitting under his red umbrella, reading his book as if he'd never moved. I went over to him. He looked up, a little distracted. "That would be my pen. Please bring your own writing utensils in the future, Mr. Jackson." I handed Mr. Brunner his pen. I didn't even realize I was still holding it. "Sir," I said, "where's Mrs. Dodds?" He stared at me blankly. "Who?" "The other chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, the algebra teacher." He frowned and sat forward, looking mildly concerned. "Percy, there is no Mrs. Dodds on this trip. As far as I know, there has never been a Mrs. Dodds at Hampton Academy. Are you feeling it right?" And that has been Chapter 1. Like and subscribe.